We're going back to the Dynasty trade market to look at 3 wide receivers and how they're being valued so we make the best decisions for our trades in our league and what we should be doing with these players. If the market's hot, we may want to do something. If it's cold, we may want to do something. So let's take a look at what the market is saying about these players. What we like to do here is look at 3 players at a time, either wide receivers or running backs. Look at the market, see how they're being valued by looking at real trades and calculators, and then go from there. We usually do this a couple times a week, and if this is something you're into, tap that subscribe button right now. Just give it a quick tap so you can have the values on your players for your Dynasty fantasy football teams. And we're going to be covering 3 wide receivers today, and the first wide receiver that we're going to be looking at is Stefan Diggs of the Buffalo Bills. Per ADP is being valued as wide receiver 10 and the 17th player overall off the board. He's 29 years old, turns 30 in November. He's signed through 2027 but has an out on his contract after the 2024 season. Last year, he had 8 wide receiver 1 weeks, 2 wide receiver 2 weeks, averaged 19.8 PPR points per game, with a high of a game with 44.8 fantasy points and a low of 4.6 fantasy points. Had a 28% target share and averaged 105 air yards per game with a 32% share of the team's passing air yards. He is equipped with Josh Allen slinging the rock, who averages 35.4 pass attempts per game and 326.2 passing air yards per game. He also had 5 games with over 400 air yards. So this is a tremendous situation with good production, and he's a tremendous talent. The only thing about him, he's starting to get a little bit older. So going to DLF's Dynasty Trade Analyzer to look at the calculator. In 1 QB leagues, he's valued more than the 102, but less than the 101. So like the 102 in a third, maybe 2 mid-firsts, something around that range. In 2 QB, it has it as a 105 range, like the top middle portion of the first round. Looking at the trade finder on DLF, that looks at real trades. So looking at the actual market of what's going on here, Tyler Higbee in 104, Jarrett McKinnon, Calvin Ridley in a third, a 2024 first straight up, Anthony Richardson straight up in 2 QB, Darnell Mooney, Josh Palmer in 209 straight up for him, Derrick Henry 1 for 1 with him, 2024 first and a 2024 second. Just looking at these trades, looking at the calculator, looking at his production from last year, I don't think he's very liquid. I don't think whoever has him on their team is not looking forward to trade him. So this deal has to be very creative. A lot of these deals have other players involved, so 1-for-1 deals are going to be hard to make. So you're probably going to have to be creative on the other end. You're probably going to have to add players on their end and your end just to make things happen. If you think about it, if you're a win-now team, you got this asset that can get around 19 to 20 fantasy points per game. Also on the high end, 44. Maybe there's a couple low games, but all in all, pretty consistent with 8 wide receiver 1 weeks. You're not looking to unload. You just understand that you have an aging asset. However, if you're selling, you got a market here that is going to be very interesting. You're just going to have to kick the tires, see what comes back at you. If you look at some of these deals, they're a little bit light in the pants for what you're getting, but it's kind of understandable. He is also an older wide receiver, so you look at that and you can see why the market is not rushing to get him. This is why he's not very liquid, so you're really going to have to be creative in trades with him. Usually you have to add a guy to get the deal done. You can see he can be expensive, but he can also be cheap as well. So if you're interested in selling or buying, you're just going to have to kick the tires and see what happens. I know it's cliche, and I know it's mentioned in almost every video, but that's what you're going to have to do in your leagues because every league's different and every trade's different with him. If you're a rebuilding team, you better cash out or run because the value's going to drop year by year, and he's also getting older. And by the time your team's built, whether you're 1 year out, 3 years out, 4 years out, however it is, however bad your team is, you got to understand by the time you're built and ready to compete to make a deep run in the playoffs, his time might be sinking, and that's something you want to be out of. And even if he's still around producing, the value would be zapped due to the age. And that's just part of life here in the Dynasty game. Again, if you're winning now, you're either happy enjoying the production, or you're kicking tires, see if you can catch a load back in return to keep the back end of your roster moving. It really depends on the situation of your team, what you have at depth, what you have at the top, and what you're doing. More than likely, you're probably going to hold and enjoy the production because it's hard to get that type of production that's stable year after year, game by game. And you're just realizing that Cliff might happen sooner than later due to his age. Let's look at another wide receiver. He's in a grand situation. We're just seeing if things can come together for him, and that's Kadarius Toney of the Chiefs. He's been talked about a lot in the fantasy football streets these days, and now it's time to mention what he can do. Right now he's being valued as the wide receiver 48 in ADP, 103rd overall. He had one wide receiver 2 week last season, 2 double-digit performances. After all, though, he got traded from the Giants, had a rough start to the season. Also, a lot of injuries throughout his career as well. This is his first offseason with the team. Signed with the team through 2024. He's paired with Patrick Mahomes, who averages 276 passing air yards per game, with one game last year with over 400 air yards and averages 38.1 pass attempts per game. So we got some volume here. As we all know, one of the most efficient, explosive offenses in the league. Going to the trade analyzer here, the calculator from DLF. In 1 QB leagues, he's around the 202 range. In 2 QB, he's around the 206 range. That seems about the middle mark if you really think things through with his value, because you're really not going to jump and throw first at him, and you're really not going to see people deal third. So that seems the middle range. Going to the trade finder, looking at some real trades here, and things are off the chain a little bit here. So Chase Claypool, Chigakonkwo, and 406 straight up for him. Chigakonkwo straight up for him in tight end premium. John Mechie in 112. James Cook. David Montgomery, 306, a 2024 second. Calvin Ridley straight up, the 211. Value is a little bit all over the place here. In some leagues it's cheap. In some leagues it's a little bit more expensive. And that makes sense because some people are chasing this Chiefs offense. Patrick Mahomes' FOMO might be keeping him from being a liquid asset on the market, because if you have him on your team and he's like your wide receiver 4, 5, 6, or whatever, however your team's built, and you got him there, and you just want to see what happens, that makes sense. When you trade for him, you are speculating that he earns target share in this offense and that he runs with it and becomes a huge commodity. You're just speculating. He's a speculation piece. What that means, you got this volatile asset here, this unknown or what's to be known about this asset, but you do see where the good could happen, where he could go off, but you could also see the downside. High risk asset as well, but you're investing because you hope that goes boom and you're willing to take the loss if the downside hits. His injury history is very extensive. This is where a lot of people are wishy-washy on him. This is why the values are all over the place. This is why you can see him go expensive and dirt cheap from league to league. You're selling because you want to capitalize on those speculative investors, because you're seeing people trying to dive in, trying to take that gamble, and it's not too expensive of a gamble considering the upside. You're talking like mid to early second. But some people are willing to pay more, as we saw through the trade finder. And that's when you really want to hit on that if you're looking to capitalize on those speculative investors. He's a player I don't want to be overweight on. Like, I don't want to have too many shares, but I also don't want to be caught with 0 shares either. I want to have a little bit of him in my portfolio. If I'm only in just one league, though, I'm not going out of my way to get him. I want him cheaper than market cost. So pretty much what the calculator just said, 202, 205 range. I want him cheaper than that. Odds are you're not getting him cheaper than that, considering a lot of people are talking him up. But if I were to get him right now, I would get him on the cheap if I could. And if I can't, then it's all right. The shares I got of him is where I caught him on the cheap like months ago, over a year ago. So I'm really not working to get past that point in my portfolio unless the deals come my way. But I just don't see that happen. I don't think the liquidity is really there with him as an asset. His profile's still very risky, even with Mahomes. Pretty boom-bust player here, because we can see the upside. We saw a little bit with the Giants. We saw a little bit last year. We can see how it can happen. We can make that story, but we can also make the story how this can go all wrong due to the injury risk, due to him not being super productive coming out of college, due to him already being traded. And then with all that tied together, it makes him a very risky player. But you're looking at a player here and we got the price tag, and we know what it is. High risk, high reward. Do you want it? Do you not? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to hold it? That's the question, and I'll let you decide for yourselves. But moving on to our next wide receiver here. He was trending up going into last season, and now things have changed a lot, especially with the volume in the offense. But things could go up here in the future and maybe next year, but he's super cheap right now. We're looking at Darnell Mooney, wide receiver of the Bears. He's being valued as wide receiver 66 and 155th overall in ADP. He's 25 years old. He signed with the team through 2023, so he will be a free agent at the end of the year. So his situation could change. That is the bright side. Potentially, he had 2 wide receiver 2 games last year, 5 games with double-digit PPR fantasy performances, missed 6 games with an ankle injury, 13 PPR points per game in 2021, and that allowed the market to speculate on him. Maybe he could hit some upside, but last year the volume turned down, but he still had a 25% target share, 5 targets per game, 61 air yards per game, so they were not moving the ball deep, even though he runs in the 4.3s, has deep speed, 61 air yards per game, but still had a 32% share of the team's passing air yards when he was on the field. Thing is, Justin Fields, looking at his volume here, 21.2 pass attempts per game, very low. 28 was the high, 11 was the low. 193 air yards per game was also very low, so the ball's not pumping out there. Didn't have a game with more than 300 air yards, so no shootouts where the ball was just flying everywhere. DJ Moore is now there, who's going to command target share, so maybe that could push some targets out away from him. So going to the trade analyzer, how's the calculator looking at for him now that we got DJ Moore here and with more information about that offense working? At 1 QB, he's being valued around the 209 range. 2 QB, around the 211 range. All in all, about a late second. Put that in a range. Late second is what the calculator's saying. Looking at the trade finder here, Aaron Rodgers straight up in 1 QB. A 2024 third. Khalil Herbert, which I know he's not worth a second. 211. Nick Westbrook, 309, 409, and 509, a 2024 fourth. So the market's valuing him less than what the calculator is, which makes sense considering where his ADP is at, the speculation of this Bears offense. So if you want to spend late capital on him, if this is where you want to throw your cheap assets at to get a veteran for, then that's what you want to do. He's a cheap guy. There could be upside from here, considering the passing volume could go up. Probably not too much up, but it's got to go up from there. It can't get much lower. That's one thing you can't say. But the thing you want to look at here in his profile is he's going to be a free agent next year. More than likely, he's going to go to a team with more volume because you can't get much lower volume than where we're at. You can always get higher volume than that. That's about as low as you can get, especially when you look at the air yards with the attempts there. It's got to increase this year. To what degree, I don't know. But 1 more attempt per game is definitely in the cards. It's easy to do that when you're this low in your per game average when it comes to air yards and attempts. But more than likely, when you're going to see more upside and his value spike up is where he goes in the free agent market. Because 1, he can get downfield. He can command air yards. He's pretty nuanced. We see that. And we also saw good ball skills out of that. So if you are going to invest, and say you get a 3rd round pick, you trade it for him, 4th rounder, because that's happened, and or something like that, you deal off one of your cheap assets for him, you get him, you're speculating that he goes somewhere else that increases his value next year. That's where the speculation is. Also had 25% target share, even with DJ Moore there. Let's say he gets like a 20%, 18% target share. We get a little bit of increase in the passing volume. Probably not much as we speculate on what's going on here in Chicago. That might mean you might get a couple good games out of him as well. You got him on the back in your roster because if you're trading a 3rd round, 4th round rookie pick for somebody, then you're more than likely not using him as your wide receiver 1. Also, liquidity at those prices that we're seeing here, probably going to be a little stiff because why sell now for something that's not really holding much value as a 3rd and 4th round pick? Again, just because it's on the trade finder doesn't mean it's going to actually happen. So that price tag might not be as liquid as what the internet is stating. Liquidity in the 2nd, late 2nd, early 3rd, more likely. So you're going to have to play the market with what you want to spend. But again, if you see cheap price tags for a player in some leagues, maybe it can happen in some of your leagues. Maybe it can happen, maybe it cannot. But again, I'm on camera here talking to a bunch of different people, which means I'm talking to thousands of leagues. So out of thousands of leagues, a few of them are probably going to get it done. So you have to look at the wrong possibilities. And also, if those possibilities don't hit, guess what? We're going to talk about more players with more possibilities that you can probably wheel and deal for if you're interested in. So that's something you need to look at and think of too. We have plenty of wide receiver videos on here from last week, week prior, all throughout the offseason. So look at those wide receivers as well, just in case you can't land this one on the cheap, if you want them on the cheap. Depends on what you want to spend your cheap assets on. Maybe you just want to load up on those cheap running backs in your rookie draft, which is a very fine thing to do considering the landscape of running back and how quick and often they get injured and how the depth charts change throughout the season. It's whatever you want to do with your team. I'm just here to talk about the prices and the ambiguity with these players and what you could potentially do or how you could invest or the psychology of the investor as well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on the way out. I'm here to help you build your dynasty teams, and I'll catch you on the next video.